Wow. My mother would be so proud. I want to say thank you to this wonderful music that we had, entertaining inside and out. Now, I know that Felicia was willing to sing the Alaska flag song, but I didn't hear any of the rest of you. Really. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle Bartlett. I've been around here for a long time, but tonight is one of the, it's one of the things that, you always dream about things, about making things happen, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It definitely doesn't happen in a vacuum, and we're going to talk about that briefly. But the first thing I want to do is the land acknowledgement, because it's really important, and we want to acknowledge the Alaska Native nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses across the state reside. In Fairbanks, our Trothyeta campus is located on the ancestral land of the Dene people of the Lower Tanana Valley. Yes. That's important for us to remember, always. All right, in terms of safety, you see the exit signs all around? Take a look, see which one's the closest, and in case of an emergency, do not climb over the person next to you to get out, okay? David Guttenberg, you left your chair at our table. It's on the side, we moved it, okay? You were allowed to come into the auditorium with your cell phones, and that was for a reason, because you're going to have a 2-minute window at the beginning of Justice Jackson's talk to take photos, and then you need to put it away, okay? You can put it on silence now, but you will be able to take pictures for 2 minutes, and Robert will be timing you. And you notice there's a lot of cops around here, all right? All right. Now to tonight. Tonight was a magical dream of calling Justice Jackson's office and having them actually accept the invitation. And when we opened registration on the 15th of June, I understand in the Breyer and Grier-Hopkins 10 o'clock meeting, it didn't start at 10 o'clock on the 15th. Everybody was there with their computers, and they went, and in 2 minutes, every seat that we had available to give away that day were gone. 2 minutes. And by 11 o'clock, we not only were completely sold out, but we had over 800 people on the waiting list. It was 800 plus. And by the next day, when we hit 1,047, we thought we should close the waiting list because it's just not fair. Running the numbers would be good. Anyway, tonight is a statewide event. It's not only a Fairbanks event, it's a statewide event. There are watch parties in Anchorage, in Bethel, in Kotzebue, in Juneau, and for those who weren't lucky enough to get a ticket in here tonight, they're watching from Wood Center. So it's wonderful to be a statewide event, and we welcome our fellow watchers from across the state to come to UAF virtually or in person anytime. We were glad to have you. And I also need to say thank you. Thank you to a lot of people and individuals and organizations that made it happen. I didn't make it happen. A lot of people, a lot of organizations, and it was statewide that the help came in. We have 6 public safety officers from the University of Alaska Anchorage who volunteered to come. You know, when the Justice, those of you who were with us 10 years ago for Justice Sotomayor realized we didn't have these safety concerns. And when they told me I needed to have 3 metal detectors, you know where there are metal detectors in Fairbanks? At the airport and at the courthouse. That's it. That's it. I was thinking, well, how much would it cost me to buy 3 metal detectors? And maybe Summer Sessions could use it as a fundraiser because nobody else has them. I called the Silver Spur, but they only had hand ones. Anyway, this is not my night, but I wanted to say thank you. Look at the back of your program. There's a lot of people, and there's 60 or more volunteers whose names are not appearing. So if you know of somebody who helped tonight in any capacity, say thank you to them, because they were very instrumental in making it happen. I have to say special thanks to my team at Summer Session, Gail Pride, Shawenta Hale, Allison Juneau, and Cheryl Agnew Schnabel. Without them, this definitely wouldn't happen, because currently we're running 136 day camps and 42 other free events this summer. So this was the 43rd. But this isn't my show tonight, okay? This is definitely not my show. But it's my pleasure to introduce our interim chancellor, Dr. Larry Hinzman, and one of my most favorite people in this town, who will in turn introduce Justice Jackson and Robert Hannon. For those of you who know Larry, he is kind, knowledgeable, and thoughtful. He is one of those rare individuals who carries his ego in his back pocket. Larry has worn many hats since I first knew him: director of the International Arctic Research Center, vice chancellor for research, professor of civil engineering, assistant director for polar sciences in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the executive director of the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. Boy, that's a mouthful. He's impressive, but you would never know it by his demeanor. We at UAF are so fortunate to have him fill the gap before our new chancellor joins us this fall. Please help me welcoming to the stage my friend, Dr. Larry Hinzman.
As Michelle said, we've known each other a long time, and every year she just gets more and more incredible. So she's just done so much for our town, so much for our community, and so much for our university. We are so lucky to have her. So I'd like to welcome you all to the Davis Concert Hall and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We are very pleased to welcome the Fairbanksans and our faculty, staff, and students, and it's just a real joy to see so many young people here today also. So thank you all for coming. And for our young people, when you think about launching your career, it's a great place to come and study. So it's just a wonderful opportunity to have everybody here, so thank you very much. We are really excited to hear about the experiences and the insights of the Supreme Court Justice, the Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson. It'll be a great evening for us all. I'd really like to welcome the members of, to acknowledge and welcome the members of our Alaska Supreme Court. May I ask Chief Justice Sue Carney, Justice Judd Pett, Justice Jennifer Henderson, and Justice Dagan Borgsheim to please rise? Thank you. And I'd also like to acknowledge we have three of our regions from our border regions here tonight. So we've got Regent Seth Church, Regent Karen Perdue, and Regent Fernando Escobar. Please rise. So this is the second time, as Michelle just mentioned, this is the second time that UAF has hosted a Supreme Court Justice, which is pretty amazing for our university and for our community. And I'm certain many of us have had the great fortune to have had the opportunity to hear Justice Sonia Sotomayor speak in 2016. And I'm really thrilled to have another member of our nation's highest court here this evening. As Michelle said, I am the interim chancellor of UAF, and I want to extend a warm welcome to our special guest, Justice Brown Jackson, our community members, our students, staff, and faculty. And whether you are here in the Davis Concert Hall or joining us from across the state, we're so delighted to have you engaged in this evening. It's a really exciting opportunity for us all. And I'd also like to extend our thanks to those who have made this evening possible. So, as you know, Michelle Bartlett and her summer sessions director and her staff have been the incredible role of driving force behind this, and as she does every year, she's been so remarkable in putting this together. We also had excellent input from the university relations team, our UAF Police Department and the UAA Police Department, and just numerous volunteers, 100 volunteers over there. So thank you all for that. And our moderator tonight is Robert Hannon, who is very well known amongst our community. Robert began his broadcasting career at a Berkeley, California community radio station in the late 70s. And he came to Fairbanks in 1983 to work at KUAC, which is right next door. And over the years has served in various capacities, including as news director. His work has won numerous awards. Most recently, he created the podcast and radio show Northern Soundings, Alaska in Conversation, and he has also collaborated with UAF summer sessions for many years on the Legacy Lecture Series. So now I'm delighted to introduce the Honorable Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I'm going to include a little bit of information about her early life because I believe it is wonderfully inspirational to our students and actually all of us. Justice Jackson grew up in Miami and attended the Miami Palomento Senior High School. She distinguished herself as a champion debater, winning the National Oratory title at the National Catholic Forensic League Championships in New Orleans during her senior year, which really emphasizes the importance of high school education. She recalled her experience with high school debate, noting, "I can say without hesitation was the one activity that best prepared me for the future success in law and life." Jackson graduated from Palomento as a senior class president, and in her high school yearbook, she was quoted as saying that she wanted to go into law and eventually to have a judicial appointment. This clearly demonstrates the value of setting career goals. After high school, Jackson attended Harvard University to study government, having applied despite her guidance counselor's advice to set her sights lower. So follow your dreams. She graduated from Harvard in 1982 with a Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude. Her senior thesis was titled "The Hand of the Oppression, Plea Bargaining Processes and the Coercion of Criminal Defendants." She holds a Juris Doctorate cum laude from Harvard Law School. President Barack Obama nominated her to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, where she served from 2013 to 2021. President Joe Biden appointed Jackson to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit in 2021, and she was nominated to the Supreme Court by President Biden in 2022 and confirmed by the United States Senate and sworn into office later that same year. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
You may be seated. Thank you so much. I am delighted to be in Alaska, my very first time. And I thought I would start, as I have done in the past, by reading an excerpt from the preface of my book to give you some background about me and to get us warmed up. The preface is titled "A Sacred Trust." I had to keep reminding myself this moment was real. It was just before noon on the 30th day of June 2022, and I was standing in front of a plain wooden door that would soon open into the Grand West Conference Room of the Supreme Court of the United States. My family was already inside. My husband, Patrick, our daughters, Talia and Layla, and my parents, Johnny and Ellery Brown, were there among the family members and friends who had gathered to witness my historic swearing in. My heart was hammering so loudly that I wondered if the two black-robed men standing on either side of me, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and retiring Associate Justice Stephen G. Breyer, could hear it too. Only 2 hours before, they and the other 7 justices of the Supreme Court had issued their final decision of the 2021-22 term. Justice Breyer, a pragmatic consensus builder, was now stepping down from that august body, having been privileged to serve as one of his law clerks more than 2 decades before. I would be stepping up in his place. I drew a deep breath to steady myself as the door in front of us swung wide and a court officer stepped aside to allow our passage into the room. Suddenly blinded by bright lights, I took a moment to understand that the source was a bank of video cameras set up to record the ceremony. As my eyes adjusted and I processed into the chamber behind the 2 justices, I felt heartened by the sight of my loved ones beaming at me from rows of chairs on the right side of the room. Chief Justice Roberts began by warmly welcoming those present. Then he turned toward me, now assuming a ceremonial air. "Are you prepared to take the oath?" he asked, his tone more formal than it had been a moment before. "I am," I responded, in a voice that sounded firmer than I felt. Patrick positioned himself between Chief Justice Roberts and me and held out a stack of 2 Bibles. "Please raise your right hand," the Chief Justice said, and I did so briskly, simultaneously resting my left palm on the pair of holy books. On top was our ancient Jackson family Bible, its brittle pages protected by the black leather binding that Patrick had had the foresight to get refurbished in 2013 when I'd been appointed to the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. I had sworn every oath on that cherished family Bible since then, just as I would now swear the constitutional oath to be administered by Chief Justice Roberts, followed by the judicial oath to be given to me by Associate Justice Breyer. Nominated by President Joe Biden 4 months earlier, I, the daughter of African-American parents who had come of age in the segregated South during the 1950s and early 1960s, would become the 116th justice and the first Black woman to sit on the Supreme Court in its 233-year history. These details made the other sacred volume on which I would swear my historic oath doubly significant. Tucked beneath our family's holy book was the Harlan Bible, donated to the court in 1906 by Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan. This tome had been used for the oath-taking by every Supreme Court justice since then. Each new justice had also signed one of the book's flyleaves after being sworn in. When the court curator brought the Bible to me in my temporary chambers later that afternoon so that I could add my own signature to the venerated roll, I thought about the justices of Harlan's era who collectively decided in the Plessy versus Ferguson opinion that state laws mandating the separation of people by race did not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution so long as the separate facilities were equal. Harlan had been the sole dissenter in the notorious 1896 case. And now here I was, affixing my signature to his Bible in black fountain pen ink. Only one generation after my mother and father had experienced the spirit-crushing effects of racial segregation in housing, schooling, and transportation while growing up in Florida, their daughter was standing on the threshold of history, the embodiment of our ancestors' dreams, ascending to a position that Justice Harlan and his colleagues likely never imagined possible for someone like me. But if Justice Harlan and his contemporaries could not have pictured this moment, my family and I, and indeed most of America, were fully cognizant of the significance of my nomination and confirmation to our nation's highest court. In subsequent conversations with people from across the country, I learned that I had been carried on 1,000,000 prayers lifted up on my behalf since the day of my nomination. I also fielded an avalanche of invitations to speak or appear in person, as excited well-wishers wanted to know my story in whatever form or fashion I might be willing to tell it. How was it, they wondered, that someone with such an unusual name and from such an unconventional background came to stand in such an unprecedented place, swearing an oath on 2 stacked Bibles that symbolized how far our nation has traveled? Mine has been an unlikely journey in many respects, and my memoir is about that journey. Thank you for being here tonight and allowing me to discuss it with you.
Oh, and by the way, the 2 minutes is up. Well, Justice Jackson, obviously such a pleasure and privilege to have you here. And let's talk about your memoir.
Wonderful.
Let's start with that and your early life. But first, I want to ask you about the writing process.
Yes.
Anybody who practices law writes a fair amount,
Yes.
but the memoir form is unique. How was that process for you? And was there a model you had, a writer that inspired you in the process?
Well, no, there wasn't actually a model. What was fortunate for me is that right at the beginning of my tenure on the court, I had a period of time between when I was confirmed and when I began the job. And I thought, you know, this really is a good opportunity to take the time to reflect on the people and the circumstances that I felt were most responsible for the success that I had seen. I had such gratitude for getting through that process. Some of you may remember it. It was pretty arduous, and I wanted to really mark the beginning of the journey. And so I was able to contact a professional memoirist. There are actually people who assist others with their writing of a memoir, and I worked with a wonderful, wonderful woman who essentially interviewed everyone in my life. I was fortunate that my parents are still with us, and so they had a lot of information. My mother collected everything that I'd ever done in my life, and so we had all of the records from my youth and beyond. And all of my friends, and interviewed me, and then she actually drafted the very first iteration, but I worked with her for 2 years in the back and forth before we were actually able to produce what you see there. It was a very interesting process.
Yeah, it seems like it. Well, let's go to an early scene in the book.
Yes.
You're seated across a kitchen table from your dad who's studying his law textbooks.
Yes.
Because he's going to become an attorney. And you decide, I think you're 4 years old?
3, 4, yes.
Yep, 3, 4. You decide right then and there you're going to follow in his footsteps, and we know how that turned out. But also, your dad was a history teacher.
He was.
And this book is deeply grounded in the African-American experience and the historic struggle for equality.
Yes.
Do I sense your dad's presence in that too?
Oh, absolutely. My father was a public school history teacher. My mother was a public school science teacher when I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1970. And they had come from Miami, Florida. As I mentioned in my opening, they had grown up themselves in the segregated South and understood very well, and it had experienced the circumstance of being very limited in terms of their ability to participate fully in society. For those of you who are familiar with the history, you know what Jim Crow segregation meant to our country and the processes and practices. This is the history of people having to ride in the back of the bus, people not being able to go into stores in an ordinary fashion, being segregated physically from society. And my parents had actually experienced that. I am born in 1970, just a few years after the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the end of Jim Crow segregation. And it was like a whole new world of opportunity for African Americans. The circumstances that had limited them were lifted, and my parents moved to Washington, D.C. when they graduated from historically black colleges in the late 1960s, as so many other African American families did, because this was where the laws had come from that were so beneficial to our community. So I'm born, and my parents are public school teachers, and they just took it upon themselves to train me to believe that I could do anything. And they believed that I could do anything after their history and their experience. And so if there were music lessons, I was taking the music lessons. If there was, swimming lessons, I was in the swimming lessons. My mother put me in absolutely every possible training ground for teaching me that I could do what I wanted to do. At some point, within a few years, my father, who had been taking all of his students to the Capitol and the Supreme Court as part of being a public school teacher in Washington, D.C., decided he wanted to go to law school. He was interested in the law, and he applied to the University of Miami, among other schools, and got in, and that was where my parents came from. So we moved back to Miami when I'm 3 years old. And as you say, one of my first memories, we lived on the campus of the University of Miami Law School. So I didn't know you were supposed to do anything else than go to law school, because that's what I knew from that young. So I'd always thought that I was going to be a lawyer, but the African-American experience, the struggles and the triumphs of the civil rights movement were very much a part of who my parents were, and then it became a part of who I am through their teaching and instruction and all that they invested in me when I was very young.
Yeah, well, it comes across because beneath that sweep of history, you tell a really intimate story about your family, several generations, and one figure in particular stands out for me, and I'm sure for many other people. It's your grandmother, Uzira.
Yes.
And that's your mom's mom?
Uzira is my mother's mother.
Yeah.
Very much a matriarch in our family. Wonderful.
Well, why was she so vividly portrayed, and what did she mean to you?
Oh, she was everything in our family. She was really the sort of center of the heart of the family. My grandfather, it's a very traditional marriage. My grandparents grew up in rural Georgia, actually on both sides of my family, but I was closer to my maternal grandparents, and in the 1920s and 30s. And so talk about a very limited existence. In the end of the 1930s, they grew up in poverty. My grandfather, when they were in Georgia, was a chauffeur for a white family, and my grandmother worked in the big house. She was like a cook in the house, and that's where they first met. And then they got married pretty young and moved to Miami because they were told that there were more opportunities there for African Americans, even though it was still a segregated society. At that time, Florida was really trying to attract and create a middle-class black community. And so my grandparents moved there, and my grandfather got a job as a driver for a beer company until he got fed up with how he was being treated in that particular role. And he quit his job, and he started his own landscaping, gardening business. He was always very good at growing plants and taking care of people's yards, and he created this business that ended up funding all 5 of his children's college education. My parents were the first generation. My mother and her 4 brothers and sisters went to college on my grandfather's business. My grandmother became a nurse's aide, but neither of my grandparents had much formal schooling. They never graduated from high school. They never had that kind of training. But my grandmother was a very religious, very faithful person, and I was very close to her. So in the book, you hear a lot of her interactions with me, her advice. She was very wise and very warm and wonderful.
Yeah, one of the more touching scenes in your book is sitting in church with her and your sense of feeling safe with her.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. She was just fantastic.
Okay, but even as you acknowledge the influence of your family in your book, there is a point to be made that you achieve the highest of heights at the Supreme Court by hard work, sacrifice, and determination. Do you think there is a tension there between the influence of the family and history and your determination?
I actually don't. I don't know that there's a tension. I think they complement one another. I think that I had the work ethic and the determination and the belief in my own capacity because I had come from a family that was hardworking, that understood its own capacity despite the limitations, and that was committed to investing in the young people, the future generations. That too is a part of the African American experience, that there are many, many generations before mine, who invested in the future, who knew that they would not live to see or to benefit from the work that they were putting into the civil rights effort, the effort to ensure that their children and their progeny would have a better life. And I am a manifestation of that. You know, I often tell people I'm like the first generation post-civil rights, that if Dr. Martin Luther King gave America a check come due, he's told America that, you know, this is the check and now you have to respond. My generation reaped the first installment of that work.
Well, let's go back to the book in the sense that you title it Lovely One, which is a translation of your given name,
Yes.
Ketanji Onika.
Yes.
And it's your Aunt Carolyn, who's a Peace Corps worker in West Africa?
In West Africa.
Yeah, who came with a list of names, and your parents picked that one, and it means lovely one.
That's what we were told.
Yeah. But the actual language or dialect is something of a mystery, isn't it?
It is. You know, my aunt, this is my mother's younger sister, her only sister, was always a world traveler and someone who was interested in helping people. She actually lived her whole life as a missionary. But at this time, when I was born, she was in the Peace Corps. And she went to West Africa. She spoke fluent French, so she was in the French-speaking countries. She was in the English-speaking countries. And my mother was pregnant with me, and she asked my aunt to send a list of African names. And again, this goes back to what I was saying before. My parents wanted me to know what my heritage was, to be proud of it, to be very conscious of that in terms of moving through the world, and so they gave me an African name. And my aunt sent a list of names and the translations as she understood them, but we were never clear as to what country or what dialect it came from.
Well, you're so well known. You'd think somebody, oh yeah, that's Swahili, or you know, they'd tell you.
There are many, many, you know, hundreds of languages in Africa.
Well, another thread that runs through your book is your lifelong love of dramatic and rhetorical performance.
Yes.
And you share a number of your award-winning speeches with it, and it all begins with your recitation of Margaret Walker's For My People, the poem.
Yes.
Well, I love it that your mother signed you up for it. You didn't even know you were going to do it.
She did.
Yeah. But did that give you your first taste of the power of oratory to move and inform and instruct?
I think so. I mean, this was, I was middle school, maybe 11, 10. And my mother, we have in Florida something called the Dade County Youth Fair, where it's animals and also children doing performances, and and you can sign up for different events. And my mother signed me up to do a poetic reading, and you had to memorize the poem, and she worked with me, and we went through the lines, and it was Margaret Walker's For My People, which my mother had read about and studied in college. It was a very well-known poem that heralds the different aspects of African American identity. And again, this is all a theme, you see it, right? The way in which I was raised and the kinds of things that my parents wanted me to study and to think about. But I do recall being that young and really being thrilled by the audience attention and the fact that I had a voice and that people were listening to me. And it ended up with my wanting to do oratory in high school, which really was the beginning, I think, of my serious interest in studying law and becoming a good lawyer, because I really enjoyed the communication aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, then let's get you to Palmetto.
Palmetto.
Senior high school.
Yes.
And its speech and debate team.
Yes.
And your mentor, Fran Berger.
Fran Berger.
Yeah, who sounds like an amazing woman. Great stories about riding in her car. I love those. And, it really does take your skills up to a whole new level, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for those young people in the audience who are thinking about something like a career in law, getting involved in a high school or even middle school activity that involves public speaking is very valuable. And something like original oratory, which was my activity, it's one in which you write your own speech. There are some activities where you deliver other people's speeches and you have to memorize them and do that. But original oratory involved writing, it involved analysis. Mrs. Berger was my coach, and she taught me how to reason and how to write and to organize my thoughts and to come up with a persuasive speech. And then once you've written it, you have to memorize it. It's a 10-minute speech, and then you perform it competitively throughout the year. And you get better and better, obviously, as you do more and more performances. But my coach was phenomenal. She really gave everything. She had been, I found this out later, she had been an orator in high school. And all of that passion that she had as a performer, she put into her students. What I find really fascinating, though, is the good of the team came before individual achievement. She didn't want various members of the team pitted against each other. That's right. I mean, there are some times in a debate tournament, because they used to randomly draw the rounds, and if you had enough members of your team, you might be pitted against one another, and she would make the junior members in that kind of pairing drop out so that we were never competing against one another, because she wanted us all to be a team rooting for our counterparts in our team and never to actually be pitted against one another.
Yeah, well, and there's a scene later in the book, I think, when you have given the indication that you might be nominated for the Supreme Court, and you have a friend from Palmetto who's visiting you, and you get that information, and you guys are right there working on like you would be in high school. It was a real flashback when I had very close friends from the debate team and from my high school years who I've been friends with forever, who followed my career and who were assisting me in the process. When you
get to be something like a nominee for the Supreme Court, you actually need a lot of help. You need people who are on the ground, answering questions, responding, supporting you, writing letters. And these two guys, brothers, who had been my closest friends from high school, were really involved in the process, and they showed up without my asking them to during the last day before the president had announced that he was going to tell who the nominee was. They said they wanted to be here, and when I say show up, I'm in Washington, D.C. at the time. One of them is from California, is in California, and one of them is still in Florida. And they call me, and I'm in Washington, D.C., and they say, guess what, we're here. I was like, what? And I was actually quite upset because I had not gotten the call. So I thought I wasn't going to be the nominee. It was, the president had said, by the end of the week, I'm going to make my announcement, and this is like Thursday morning. And I hadn't gotten the call, so I figured it was not me. And my friends were there, and they were like, we're here because we want to celebrate with you, or if it's not you, we want to console you. And I said, well, guys, I guess we'll just have to have a sad dinner tonight because it is obviously not me. I would know by now if it was so. And we planned to go out to dinner. I called my husband. I'm like, we're meeting for dinner. Stephen and Richard are in town, and it'll be sad, but we'll all be together. And I'm leaving the office on the Thursday night before the Friday announcement. And at about 7 o'clock, I get a call from the president. And so what I thought was going to be the sad dinner actually turns into a speech writing session because he said, I'm going to announce you tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and oh, by the way, you've got to have a speech. I was like, what? So it just so happened that Stephen and Richard were there, and we were back together writing a speech just like we had done in high school. So.
Well, what a testimony. Well, it's a testament to Fran Berger that she forged such a sturdy team. Okay, well, speech and debate take you to Harvard for an invitational tournament.
Yes.
And when you're there, you're smitten by the campus, if I can say that. And you decide, I'm going to apply here. And they grant you you're a student there. And your initial excitement your freshman year starts to wane a little bit after a few weeks. You're homesick, and you're wondering if this is the right place for you.
That's right.
It's a good fit.
That's right.
And then you have a chance encounter on campus. I love the story. Will you tell us?
Yes. So, like so many first years in their first semester, I was homesick, as you say. And the other important piece of this is my birthday is in September. And so I was turning 18. I was away from home for the very first time. I'm in, you all are familiar with the cold weather. I am not. Boston is cold. So I'm in a cold, foreign place, and I was just miserable. Nobody knew it was my birthday, and it was just terrible. And in this same period of time, I'm walking through Harvard Yard at dusk one evening, and a black woman I don't know is coming toward me on the path, and as we cross, she leans over and says, "Persevere," and keeps walking. And I'm like, what? I think she saw something in my face and my demeanor, but it was like a single word that really spoke to me. It really spoke to me. And I went back to my dorm, and my mother and my aunt, this was back in the day when you didn't have cell phones or any way to really communicate quickly. My mother and my aunt had written me letters, and I got my letters, and as I said, my aunt was missionary, and she wrote a letter that said something to the effect of, I know that these early days in school have been hard for you, but please remember that God has put angels all around you to guide and protect you. And I thought, maybe that woman was an angel. And so I started to feel better.
Well, I don't want to get old Joseph Campbell-y on you, but in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the sudden appearance of a helper is the hero starts out on the quest, appears. It's
So
a standard
interesting.
motif. And that's what I thought of when I read that in your book.
I have to look that up. I did not know.
I'll give you the chapter and verse
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to, this is going to be a spoiler alert.
Yes.
But you and Harvard get along really well.
We do.
You graduate magna cum laude and then go into Harvard Law School and graduate cum laude, and you're a supervising editor at the Harvard Law Review.
I am.
And a lot of people don't know, this is the premier legal journal written by students.
It is.
And to be a supervising editor is what an honor.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So, so that was a spoiler alert. You did well. Okay. But while at Harvard, another student prominently displays a Confederate flag in their dormitory window. It's a provocative act, and it gets a reaction. But you write that it taught you how to respond to similar situations with dignity and keeping your eye focused on what you needed to achieve. And would you share what your mother told you? Because I think it's really resonant for us today.
Yeah, well, there were actually two, I think, quotes that really carried me through that particular set of circumstances. One was a quote that I actually had recently learned at the time, and that I shared with other Black students on campus who were very up in arms about the Confederate flag incident. It became a real focus of the Black student organization on campus, and we were spending a lot of time trying to get the university to respond to this student and to take down this symbol. And it reminded me of Toni Morrison's quote, which is that the very serious function of racism is distraction, that it keeps you from doing your work because you're focusing on responding to that provocation. And so it was a quote that reminded me and many of the other students that we had to keep focused on the reason we were brought to campus and not allow this to take us off track, allow this to cause us to fail our classes, which is precisely what the person would have wanted. So that was one. And then in the same sort of time frame, when I'm noticing a lot of incidents and issues that are similar, my mother used to say to me, guard your spirit, Ketanji, to focus on the unfairness of life is to be devoured by it. So don't spend time focusing on the slights, which are there, which you see, but it's very important to stay focused on the work that you have been called to do. And that's what I've tried to do in my life, and I think it's definitely attributable to my success.
Mm-hmm. Well, you make a number of friends. You find three sisters, if that's right. Antoinette Coakley, Lisa Fairfax, and Nina Simmons.
Yes.
And there you become your sisters. Yeah. And there's it's a lovely rapport you describe among them. Each had a strength that contributed to the whole. And there's that theme again of the individual and the group dynamic that I loved. But you also make another friend at Harvard.
I do.
Your future husband, Dr.
husband.
Patrick Jackson. and he's now a prestigious professor and surgeon. But when you two get together, and I knew you guys were a good match because you said he too knew when he was a kid what he wanted to do.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
So I thought, match made in heaven. But your family and friends weren't so sure, and they, tell me about that.
Well, they weren't so sure because Patrick is very, very different than I am in a lot of ways. We're also very alike in a lot of ways, but for those of you who don't know, Patrick is Caucasian, and he is actually something that people sometimes refer to as a Boston Brahmin, which is, for those of you who don't know, sort of like a sect of people who have been in Boston for generations. They can trace their families back to like the Mayflower. Patrick is 6th generation Harvard. So, you know, a long time, and from the Boston area, and just very, very different from me. I'm 2nd generation any college. I show up at Harvard, and we meet each other, ironically, in a class, a sociology class. Patrick is pre-med, but he's a sociology major because he wants to learn about people and know about people and be the best doctor that he can be. And so we take this, I'm a government major, but this sociology class is like one of the core requirements. And this class is called The Changing Concept of Race in America. And he is sitting behind me and tapping me on the shoulder and talking to me and putting his keys on my earrings and doing all kinds of silly things. And I think he's cute, but you know, I mean, I'd never dated anyone, so I didn't really know what was happening. And it got even more confusing because Patrick and I had this sociology class like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And in my government class on Tuesday and Thursday, I would see him, and he wouldn't talk to me at all. At all. And I thought, boy, this is really weird. So I say to my roommates, the women that you mentioned, you know, there's this guy and he's hot and cold and he talks to me sometimes. And they say, leave him alone, he's insane. You don't have anything to do with him. And I say, you know, no, I am going to confront him on one of the friendly days. So on a nice day, I say to him, hey, why don't you talk to me in our government class? And he says, I'm not taking a government class. And I say, yes, you are. I see you in this class. And he says, oh, you must be talking about my identical twin brother. Because he has an identical twin brother. So we cleared it up, and I was happy, and we actually didn't date for that. Well, that was at the beginning of the school year, my sophomore year, his junior year. We didn't date until the very end, but then we dated for 7 years before we got married, and this year it is 30 years we've been married. 30 years. But as you say, I mean, it was a long time ago. 30 years ago, interracial relationships were not as common as they are right now. And my parents, who I've described at this point, were a little concerned, you know, about the circumstances. My roommates confronted him when I didn't know. Tried to, yes, they were like, hey, what are you doing with our friends? Because it was not the norm. But we had very similar values. We have very similar family values, backgrounds. His parents have been married for 50 years. My parents have been married for 50 years. Close family circumstances, and we noticed a lot of the similarities. You mentioned Patrick knew when he was 3 years old that he wanted to be a doctor. And so we fit, and it's been great.
Yeah. Well, it certainly stood the test of time. But you described that every relationship has its tensions. And it must have been hard when he's called away from the family to save a patient's life on the operating table.
You can never beat that. That's
Yeah.
the sad part.
Yeah.
Patient on the operating table always trumps, planned dinner that you had.
Well, did you ever think, oh, if only it took up dermatology?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would have been much happier, but no. He loves his job. I mean, I've never seen anybody who is more excited to go to work, even in the middle of the night, even when he gets called, because he feels very passionately about helping people, and he always has. And so I never would have forced him to do anything else.
Well, let's talk about that family dynamics, because like a great many professional women, it's a tough balancing act between family and work and profession. And especially when you're working at this high prestige law firm, your account, if I had hair, it would have raised my hair, would have stood on end. I don't think I could have handled it. So am I making too much of it, or was it really that challenging?
Oh no, it was really, really hard. It was very demanding, as all jobs are, but when you have a child who you're responsible for, who you have to provide for, it's very difficult to bill hours at the same time. And back then, there wasn't technology in the way that we have now that allows you to work from home. So you had to actually be in the office. And my husband was a resident, a surgical resident, so his hours he couldn't control. And so there was a lot of tension, even within our relationship, about who was going to relieve the nanny, who was going to get home. We ended up living in a place where neither of our families were. We thought we were being clever because he was from Boston and I was from Miami, and we said, we'll live in Washington, D.C., which is equidistant, and then we don't have to choose the family. But it actually was terrible, because we had no family support, and just raising our daughters with high stress parents and very demanding jobs was quite challenging. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to some milestones in your career, and I get exhausted just reading them. But I'm going to say there are 3 federal clerkships, including one at the Supreme Court with Justice Breyer. Work at both large and boutique law firms, and I love that term, boutique law. It's like you can get a manicure and some sort of legal counsel at the same time. Service at a federal public defender, as a federal public defender, work on the United States Sentencing Commission, service on the federal district and appellate benches, and ultimately the Supreme Court. I'm sure all of that experience goes to inform you. But one of the questions we got from the public comes from Nathaniel Baring, and I think it's a great question. How has your experience as a federal public defender continued to influence your jurisprudence?
Great question. People ask me that often, in part because I'm actually the first former federal public defender to get appointed to the Supreme Court as well. I think having that experience has really influenced mostly how I communicated as a district court judge. So in our federal system, there are 3 different levels of court. The trial court, which is the district court, that's what it's called, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court. And at the trial court level, you are actually, as the judge, interacting with criminal defendants. This is where they first come into the system, and there are many times jury trials to determine whether or not this person has actually committed the crime that they have been accused of. And one of the things that I learned as a federal public defender was how confusing the trial process is for criminal defendants. When I was a federal public defender, I was an appellate attorney, so all of my clients had been convicted, and part of my job was to talk with them to figure out going through their transcripts of their trials, what mistakes had been made, what concerns they had, what arguments we could make before the appellate panel. And I would call my clients, I would say almost all of them were in jail, and I would say, Mr. So-and-so, I'm your new attorney. I'd like to talk to you about your trial. Can you tell me about the experience? And so few of them could help me with the project of analyzing their trial. Because instead of being treated from their perspective with respect and being told what was happening, they felt as though they had been slighted, that they had been disrespected, and it was impeding their ability to reform. Because instead of being in jail, actually taking responsibility for what they had done and understanding the process in order to rehabilitate, they were feeling jaded and upset with the judge and the process. And I think when I became a judge, I was very mindful of what it was like for criminal defendants to go through the process. And it influenced the way in which I communicated with the defendants who came before me. I spoke to people directly. I used their names. I had a script in which I would script out my discussions to make sure that I covered everything and explained to them everything that was going to happen, because when and if I sent them to jail, I wanted them to know that it was not because I was mad or I was doing something to them. It was because of their behavior. It was because of what they had done. And I thought it was very important for our criminal justice system to have people take responsibility in that way. And it was something, it was something that the experience of assisting people who had gone through the process, I think, taught me that I would not have learned or known had I not been a federal public defender.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of public questions from the public, we got 50 or so, and of course we can't get to all of them, but I do want to follow up with a question that Nisha Steinkruger, who's a retired Superior Court judge in Fairbanks, has the court's increasing reliance on its emergency docket advanced or hindered the goal of equal justice?
Well, I have been quite a vocal critic of the court in terms of its use of the emergency docket. I've done so in a number of my opinions in emergency docket cases. I've talked about the court's processes, and I recently actually gave an hour-long lecture at Yale University in which I focused on the emergency docket, explaining the various ways in which I thought it was problematic. I commend that to all of you. It is actually on Yale's website for those who are interested in the sort of long-form discussion. But the short of it is that I do think that it has hindered the achievement of justice in several respects. One of them is that the way in which the emergency docket process works, it is not transparent. The court ends up, in many cases, not writing a full opinion to explain what it is that the court has decided, and I think that is problematic for the public, especially when you're talking about cases that end up addressing very significant issues with clear consequences, negative consequences. I think the public needs to understand the court's analysis. I think the process actually can work in inequitable ways, that it allows for certain people and interests to actually be advanced in terms of the hearing from the court with respect to the merits of their cases in ways that others don't. I think it interferes with the litigation, the standard litigation process, because the emergency docket relates to cases that are actually pending in the lower courts. These are cases that have not come to the Supreme Court. So it's like the Supreme Court is intervening in lower court processes. And when that happens, in my view, in many cases, it warps the lower court process. It makes it harder for the lower court judges to assess the facts and actually reach an independent determination. Because one of the factors that the Supreme Court is looking at is the likelihood of success on the merits. So when the Supreme Court jumps into a case and opines on the merits, it really disturbs the lower court process, which is about determining the merits. It's about determining who actually has the better legal argument based on the facts that are still in development. So, I mean, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but in total, I think it is a net negative for the court to be evaluating issues on the emergency docket, and I think we should do so very rarely.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've become known for writing powerful dissents. And what role does dissent play in the development of the law?
Well, it will not surprise you to know that I'm a fan of dissents. No, I really think that dissents are actually one of the most extraordinary aspects of the American legal tradition, because they embody one of our core values, which is the freedom of expression, the tolerance of minority views, that it is extraordinary that we have a system that allows for people who disagree, even at the highest levels, to explain their disagreement, to tell everyone how they think the case should have come out, and to essentially lay down a marker for future generations in the hopes that at some point in time, people will agree with their view. I mentioned in my book and at the opening session, the preface of my book talks about Justice Harlan in the Plessy versus Ferguson case. He was the sole dissenter, and eventually his dissent became the court's view. So I think dissents are extraordinarily important for that reason.
Well, so much to ask you, but this really underscores something about the Supreme Court that most of us wouldn't appreciate. You have these sudden calls that you have to deal with and address.
Yes.
And so we're just so honored you got here and spent the time with us.
Thank
so
you
thank
so
you.
much.
Justice
Wonderful to
Ketanji
be
Brown
here.
Jackson.